Hey there! So, I've been feeling a bit creatively stymied lately. I've been spending all this time video editing and I've hardly gotten to sew. Also, the things I have made lately were recreations, which, as I said in the last video, tend to be a little unsatisfying to me because perfection is unattainable when you're copying a simple image. But I had a wedding coming up, so I decided to take a week off of video editing and just make something fun and creative and beautiful. That isn't trying to be any particular thing. If you remember back when I made this set of skirts, one was a double-sided deep red and brown silk taffeta. I originally had 2 yards of the silk and the skirt only required 1.5 yards. So I've been saving that last 18 inches, thinking that I would eventually make a simple matching bodice, probably like this bodice in my 18th century capsule wardrobe. However, it has been a long time since I did an embroidery project. I want to briefly discuss the making of my tiger dress, which some people who've gone way back into my Instagram history have asked me to do a video on. Unfortunately, the tiger dress predates my channel, so this is the closest you're going to get. I made the tiger dress over about a 1.5 month period in early 2018, to wear to a different wedding. I had recently become obsessed with Michele Carragher, the embroidery artist for Game of Thrones, and it's gorgeous. It's incomparable. The texture, the dimension, the color, that was a well-spent obsession. So I had some bright orange silk in a fairly low-quality dupioni. I had no idea what to do with it or why I bought it in such a lurid color. I just bought it because it was real silk and it made me feel special. I needed a dress to wear to a wedding, so I decided that the only acceptable use for such an orange silk was a dress featuring tigers, which I decided to embroider inspired by Michele Carragher. I started by tracing my little tiger motifs onto either side front panel, then I began the painstaking process to hand embroider the tigers. I'm showing slides roughly in the order I stitched the various parts. It certainly helped that I was sewing onto orange fabric, so gaps between the stitches didn't show. Once each tiger was finished, I went back over it and traced the black stripes with a thin black and gold twisted thread, which is a staple for Michele Carragher's embroidery. It's very fine and great for small detail work, and the gold metallic striping adds so much texture in one simple step. I also highlighted the white threads with a silver overlay, and the first tiger was finished. I only had 5 more to go. As you might predict, I spent 90% of my time allotment for the project on those tigers, and then I only had a few days left to do the other embroidery and then actually make the dress. I started by tracing out the scrollwork design I wanted, and then added short vines made from seed beads and little diamond-shaped beads. Added some large flowers using ribbon embroidery. The flower stems are little scraps of velvet stitched down and faded in with pink, green, and silver embroidery threads. And then I added little gold beads and threads spraying out from the flowers for some reason. I don't know. At that point, I was really out of time, so I sort of copped out and finished the vine by twisting a whole bunch of threads together and then stitching them down in black and gold thread. That wasn't quite enough, so I found this textured gold cord in the trimming section at Joann's and added more scrolling. Then I had to still make the dress, and I probably left myself a day to do that. But it was awesome, and it was a great hit at the wedding, and I took it to the fair, and it's been my staple fancy dress for the last 3 years. However, I feel like it's time to make something new. But this time I don't have 6 weeks, I have 6 days. In order to cut the time of making and testing a pattern, I'm going to use this bodice pattern from the chintz dress I made earlier this spring. One slight alteration, the fabric I have left isn't quite wide enough to fit the longest back pieces on, so I cut the top off of the pattern and spliced it onto the back of the shoulder strap. Simple enough, and I can get it all cut out. I also cut out a lining for the center front, where I'm going to do the embroidery, which I'll use to stabilize the silk instead of interfacing. This project is going to be great for stash busting. I used up my silk taffeta, that pink linen is the last remnant I have from this skirt, I cut an interlining from the cotton denim I have left over from my first bootstrap dress form attempt, and the actual lining used up the scraps of my lightweight madder linen, left over from my first set of 18th century stays, which was actually a really good color match for the silk. I didn't have quite enough, but a little bit of piecing made it work. For the embroidery of this project, I was thinking either a tree or pomegranates or something to incorporate both. And lo and behold, I found this! I'm not sure of the origin, but the symmetry and the art style look very Indian, which works well since 18th century embroidery tended to be heavily influenced by Indian exports. In the end, my finished product looked different enough that the connection was kind of lost, but still. I started work by stitching the stabilizer to the bodice front, zigzagging the edges to keep them from fraying, then I tried to trace the design on my lightbox. Then I realized that I was dumb and seam ripped the stabilizer back off so that I could actually see the design to trace it. The design traced, I stitched it back to the stabilizer, and it was ready to start embroidering. For that, we will need pretty things. Let's review the options, shall we? First, we have actual embroidery floss. I bought both of these collections at garage sales, and I've only added to them a little bit over the years whenever I needed a specific color. Next, wool roving. I bought some of this after watching videos on felting and seeing the incredibly lifelike color and texture people can get. I don't actually know how to felt, but it seems like a very Michele Carragher-esque skill to combine with embroidery. Next, black and gold twisted thread, as already discussed. If you're going to buy only one thing, this is what I'd recommend. Next, beetle wing. My friend Anna bought these for me for Christmas a couple years ago. I haven't had a chance to use them yet, and I don't know if it will be on this project either, but I have them for when I need them. Then we have Italian tubular mesh wire, another Michele Carragher staple. She used this in a lot of designs, but particularly in the dragon scale embroidery for Daenerys blue dresses. I'm also pretty convinced it was used in Claire's wedding dress and for her choker necklace. It's very versatile stuff because it comes in a range of thicknesses and colors. You can stretch and mesh it to fill different gaps, and the effect is really cool when you have a denser rim around a lighter center. Next, bullion cord. Bullion is an incredibly fine wire that has been coiled into a tiny tube. It was used in a lot of historical European embroidery, and Michele Carragher uses it most notably in embroidering lion's manes, which she did a lot of. I haven't ever used it yet because it is a bit bold. It's just very dense and bright compared to embroidery thread, so I feel like you need a perfect place to use it. You don't want to just slap it on anywhere. Similarly, there is memory cord. This is a wire that has been wrapped in embroidery thread, so it looks a bit more matte and it comes in more colors than bullion. I bought these at Joann's a few years ago, but I can't seem to find them anymore. I like them because they're a bit easier to work with than bullion. Bullion is just really slippery. I also have a collection of actual antique metalwork embroidery supplies. I haven't used any of these before because they are so precious, and I don't know if I ever will. It will take an equally precious project. When garage sailing or antiquing, I keep an eye out for vintage spools with the original wool thread. These are fairly common, and the threads have great texture. I also keep an eye out for metallics. You can never get enough metallics. Then I have this box of random findings and pretty things, which I doubt I'll need for this project. Then beads, very important. I look for anything glass, metal, or natural stone. Basically anything but plastic. You just can't fake the sheen of metal or the inner fire of glass or the complexity of stone. I buy most of my beads locally from Joann's or Hobby Lobby. Some of these I did get online from Caravan Beads, where you can look for some of the specific beads Michele Carragher uses. Then I have another box of random beads and potentially useful jewelry making supplies. Then my bag of silk and velvet scraps. There is also ribbon, preferably in silk for silk ribbon embroidery, and metallic machine embroidery thread, which I find shreds itself the slowest. And I'm sure there are another million possible things that could be used: felt, leather, paint, who knows. Now, I don't know how much of that I'll actually use for this project, so why did I show it all to you? Because if you, like me, are attracted to that very artistic, free-flowing embroidery like Michele Carragher does, the key is really variety of options. So I pick things up cheaply whenever I can find them. If you tried to buy all of this at once, it would be prohibitively expensive. Hoarding is a way of life for crafters. To start my embroidery, I'm going to outline the trunk and the major tree branches. I decided to use some natural undyed gray roving for this. I think it could have been very effectively done through felting, and maybe even made three-dimensional, but I didn't feel I had the time to spend researching and learning how to do proper felting, so I just spread it out over the trunk and used a silver thread to start tacking it down. As the trunk divided into branches, I split strands off from my hank of wool. I started twisting it as I went to keep the fibers together better, but I also liked the 3D effect it gave the smaller branches. I generally like this idea and the outcome. It was my first time trying it out, and I think with practice I could make it work better. But basically, the roving replaced the hours it would have taken me to fill in the trunk with embroidery threads, and did it in a more textured way. When that was done, the design started looking extremely Tree of Gondor, so I decided to move on to the pomegranates and come back to the trunk later. I just felt I needed to cover the essentials before I got too carried away with texture. I found these lovely red faceted glass beads that looked perfect for the pomegranates. I figured I'd pair them with these gold chevron-shaped beads as a base, and then with little gold seed beads at the top. There were 61 pomegranates to bead, so between that and the trunk, I pretty much used up day 2. I started day 3 unsatisfied with my pomegranates. I just felt that they needed more. I wish I'd had the time to use more variety, making some of them open so that I could fill them in with tiny red beads as the seeds. But I didn't really know how to make that work in scale. Instead, I used this red embroidery thread I found at Joann's, laced with a metallic red thread, and I outlined each pomegranate. I'm not sure how much that really added in the end, but I like it. Then I decided that the next most important priority should probably be the stems and smaller branches. This took me a few tries to figure out what I liked. I tried the black and gold thread, but it was too fine. Then I tried a gold cord, but it was too thick and it liked to shred itself. I finally struck a balance with a metallic embroidery thread. I have a selection, but this one was a dull gold, just slightly more gold than silver. 3 strands at a time was perfect, thick enough to be seen, but not thick enough to cause problems sewing with. I used a pretty simple zigzagging stitch to outline every stem and branch, and that was my day 3. Day 4 was all about the leaves, my final missing piece. For the leaves, I decided to use bugle beads instead of thread. I looked back at the original inspiration photo because I love the way those leaves have a mix of colors that blend and play so well off each other. I tested that out and quickly realized that red was just not going to work here, not on a red background. So I got rid of the red and stuck with this selection. I have short, shiny black glass beads and some short golden glass beads. I have a mixed set of greens in long emerald greens, long teal greens, and short pale greens. Then I found these long metal twist beads in silver and gold. And I just began stitching them down, along every branch, one at a time, all day long. On day 5, I did not sew. I went to the Steam and Tractor show at my dad's hometown. It's a cool heritage event showing off all sorts of tractors and antique steam engines. They even plant a special cornfield for the event and harvest it during the weekend, using only the old tractors and tools. The show has historical trades and crafts, lots of tractors, lots of steam engines, and a big, beautiful swap meet. I scored big at the swap meet. Just look at these purses. Look at those harp tables. Look, singer parts. And you would not believe how cheap I got this buttonholer. Then I ran into the guy who taught the archery class at the camp I went to as a kid. He is a bow maker and a flint knapper, which I learned is the art of carving stone and obsidian into arrowheads and spear tips and knife blades. Such a wealth of knowledge, and we'll talk more about what I learned in a future video over on the World Building channel. I unfortunately goofed off Saturday morning too, garage sailing with Michele, meaning that by the time I got home and back to work, it was like 3 p.m. and the dress looked like this, and I had to leave town the next morning for the wedding at 9:30 a.m. I started work on the actual stitching, figuring that the embroidery was done enough if I didn't have time. I started by lining up the denim inner lining with the silk pieces and basting them along the edges. They pulled just a tiny bit, enough that I'm sure I would have preferred to baste them by hand. I mitigated the pulling by basting them in segments only, working down each piece so that if they pulled, at least both sides would be pulled in the same direction. Then I started piecing the bodice together, minus the stomacher piece. But I sewed the straps to the side fronts, and I sewed the little tuck in the center back pieces. For future reference, I think it saves a little bit of fabric to stitch this as a tuck, and it's slightly more rigid, but it is definitely quicker and easier just to cut them as separate pieces. Then, because of the slightly weird way I pieced the back and the straps, I needed to stitch them together first before I could sew the center back to the side back. And that is as far as I can take these pieces for now, so let's get the lining done. I sewed it in the exact same way, but I also added in the center front panel. One last bit of prep work, I took the denim interlining for the stomacher and I stitched a strip of bias tape down the center, where I'll add the boning later. Now I've taken it as far as I can, and it's time to finish the embroidery. All I really want to focus on now is adding texture and covering more of the wool roving. I started with a very fine strip of mesh wire in a slightly goldish silver. I stretched it out and then sewed one edge down along the side of the trunk. I stitched it up along one branch and then came back down the other side, allowing it to stretch out unevenly. Then I decided to add a second strip, this time in a bright gold. It was really a bit too wide to use here, but I stretched it out and then twisted it. I don't know, I think it worked okay. Then I decided to add bullion trim along some of the edges, to give them a sharper contrast against the red. I braided one strip of it, which I think could have worked better if I'd made it more intentionally uneven, but it's alright, it's just a little bit more texture. Then I added a row of beads between two branches and sort of cascading down the trunk. I feel like all of these elements are very trunk-like individually, and maybe I should have just stuck to one, but the point of this project was really that I wanted to try out different techniques and materials, so I don't regret it. Then the bottom of the trunk really needed work, both because it was plain compared to everything else, and because the roving needed more tacking it down. I used a chain stitch that is also a favorite of Michele Carragher's, first in gold thread, and then I traced some of it and added more in black and gold twisted thread. Okay, with that, it is now 11 p.m. and I need to call it quits on the embroidery and actually get this bodice put together. I really like this kind of scaly dragon stitching at the very end. I wish I had done that a bit more. Every time I do a project like this, I figure out new things, so it's never a pass or fail. It's always an experiment. But I'm pretty happy with it. There's a lot more that I wish I could have done, but I just don't have time on this project, but that's okay. To finish this up, I first revisited the skirt. I'm reusing my red silk skirt for this project, but if you remember in the video, I was unhappy with how much body the silk had and how poofy it made the skirt. The plan had been to sew chains inside the skirt hem, but then I was in the middle of moving and I never got around to it. Time to get that done now. The chains came from Joann's. I was basically just hefting all of the chains they had, looking for the heaviest, thinnest chain, because unfortunately I only had a 1/2 inch hem to work with. Not gonna lie, inserting the chain was difficult and much more time consuming than I had planned. Halfway through, I thought it was looking terrible and almost took it out. But when I finished and stitched the opening closed again, I decided I like it. The hem is a little bit bubbly now, but I don't think anybody but me would notice. But as far as the actual effect goes, I was pleasantly shocked by how well it worked. It's about perfect, evenly weighted, but it doesn't feel heavy or dragging to wear. It hangs so much nicer now, definitely saves the skirt. So, back to the bodice. I pinned the embroidered panel to the boned interlining. I stitched around it and then I sewed the side front seams. And with that, the bodice is in one piece. I decided that now was probably a good time to clip all of my curved edges and iron the seams. Then I prepped the zipper. A matching zipper would have been nice, but I didn't have one in stock, so I just used a black metal zipper. I turned it inward and basted it down. Okay, so official try on, and it fits like it should. Always good to know when you didn't make a mock-up. You just, okay. Yeah, I'm thinking that the wrinkles that are present in the side will pull out once I get the edges trimmed down to their actual length. The neckline's a little funky. I'm okay with trimming it down a bit since this is more of a special occasion kind of thing and not something I just want to wear to the grocery store. Well, you never know. The rest of it fits pretty darn smoothly. I don't really have any complaints. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get the lining pinned onto it and get it turned right side out. I really have to finish this. It's late. I don't even know how late. Oh, it's only a little after midnight. Okay. The quickest lining seemed to be bagged lining, which I definitely don't recommend for 18th century, but it works in a pinch. I just placed the lining over top the bodice, right sides together, and then matched up and pinned all of the seams and markings. I stitched all the way around it, which was tricky at the zipper, and I don't think I got it quite right, but I folded the zipper tail aside and skipped over the metal teeth. Then, in one piece, I clipped all of the curved edges, trimmed the corners, and turned it right side out through the arm's eye. Okay, here's where we're at. Sorry, I've not been updating as much, but it's after 2. It's basically down to 2 things. I need to finish the arm's eyes and I need to do all of the ironing, and maybe while I'm in the car tomorrow, I will do a bit of running stitch, top stitching. So in conclusion, this kind of bagged lining for an 18th century project does technically work. It's definitely not the best, but if you're on a time crunch, you can do it. However, I was definitely not careful enough with the zipper, because that's a little pathetic, but whatever. Alright, finished it up. I decided that the fastest, neatest way to finish the arm's eyes was through bias tape. Luckily, I had a close-ish red bias tape in stock, so I opened it up and stitched all along the outside of the arm's eye layers. Then I trimmed the raw edges down, folded the tape over top, turned it to the inside, and started hand stitching it down. I figured this seam needed to be strong since it was pretty thick, so I didn't want to fell it only through the lining, and I'd rather have visible running stitches than machine stitches, so that's what I did. And done. And it's 4:17. Alright, I'm going to bed. I have to be up in 2 hours. I'm surprised by just how much I love this set. It's such a weird blend of my interest, and the embroidery still looks very Lord of the Rings, but I'm okay with that. I found that the neckline wasn't laying as flat as I wanted to, so later I went back and top stitched along the neckline and lower edge. The silhouette is definitely 18th century, but I really like how the cut modernizes it, with the shortened skirts, the sleeveless bodice, and the simple trimming with only the central design. I was worried that I'd need to baste the skirt and bodice together because gaping was a problem for me in the past, but I found that when wearing the ensemble over top actual stays, instead of just adding boning to the bodice, it stayed in place much better. It's not perfect, and I don't love that the belt loops peek out, but in exchange I have two completely detached pieces which can easily be swapped out in the future. Can you imagine this bodice over a poofy shift with billowing sleeves and a long velvet skirt? Or used in a Rachel Maxey type casual armor shield maiden look? Because I can. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful and enjoyable, and if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you can subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow my Instagram. I also have another YouTube channel just for world building and another Instagram for that. See ya! And a special thanks to Amber Aldrich, Demeester Mehta, Erin Wishart, Charlotte R., Shia Thompson, Haley Martin, Jesse Bryant, Shannon, Leisha Slaughter, Mackenzie D., and Stella Sapient. Thank you so much for your support of this channel.